Okay, so now that we have discussed kind of some self-assessment tactics, really thinking about what kind of job you all want and what kind of job will complement your all strengths the most, we can now start talking about applications. So most jobs are going to require an application, and some of you may be wondering, why do jobs require applications? They can seem kind of tedious at times, but like I said, nearly all employees will require an application. And the reason why is it does allow employees to kind of standardize some information and obtain some more detailed information that you all wouldn't necessarily have on your resume. Now, some of the content on the application you're going to also have on your resume, but we'll discuss maybe some elements that won't be on the resume. And although applications can be time consuming, sometimes they can be a bit repetitive, you do need to try to take the application seriously as possible because this is kind of your oftentimes first contact with an employer. So you want to take it seriously so that they take you seriously. So we talked last time in class a little bit about how sometimes you can apply in person and sometimes you're going to want to apply online. So let's talk a little bit about maybe when you should apply in person if you're trying to decide the best route to take. Sometimes it's not possible to apply in person, but sometimes it is, especially if you're looking for a job that's more local or if you have references at that job. If you are applying in person, that typically does make an impression. Obviously, they're going to see you in person. Hopefully, that will help you stand out because they can actually put a face to the name. It shows ambition. You're willing to actually go to the job site, try to talk to maybe the hiring managers, and that takes a little bit more effort than applying online. So that's going to show maybe some effort that you're really wanting a certain position if you're willing to take time out of your day to apply in person. Applications in person do tend to be better option for small companies a lot of the time. It may be easier to walk into a smaller company and meet some of the hiring managers or maybe even some of your bosses because there's not as much hierarchy there. So you'll definitely just need to check maybe the job posting, or a lot of times some companies will maybe have signs outside saying, call this number or apply in person. So look for that. And it can help speed up the process, especially within smaller companies. There's not as many hoops to jump through. And if they're able to see you in person, if you're able to actually talk to them in person, and you leave a good impression, it's likely the employer will kind of want to jump on that opportunity and hopefully speed up that hiring process for you. So some tips if you do decide to apply in person. Dress well when you're picking it up always. So this is kind of a little scale of, casual to dressy. Now, depending on the job will depend on maybe what you want to wear to pick it up, but my philosophy is you can never be overdressed or overeducated. So always err on the side of maybe looking more dressy than more casual. Once again, that's going to leave an impression, and the employer is going to see that you have some ambition too within your appearance, which is something I talk about in my communication class, how appearance can have an effect on professionalism and how much someone may take you seriously. So try to dress well if possible. Also, if it's possible, when you pick up the application, try to take it home. That'll just give you more time to fill it out, maybe easier to obtain some information they may ask. But if they want you to fill it out on the spot, that is fine too, and we'll talk about maybe some elements you need to bring to help fill out that application if you are going to just submit it on the job site. Try to read the entire application before beginning, just to make sure you have all that information you need that can also sometimes give you some insight on if this position is going to be right for you. Use a pen, take your time, print clearly, especially if you are using a pen rather than typing the application. Obviously, then the employer needs to be able to read the application. So personally, I know I don't always have the best handwriting, especially if I'm in a hurry, but when I'm filling out applications, I do slow down and take my time to make sure that everything is legible. And then, not that we use cursive a lot anymore in our society, but definitely use print if possible. Usually that's easier to read, and make sure you complete every line. You don't want to leave anything blank. There's a reason why they're putting that on the application, so they are expecting you to fill it out, even if you do need to put not applicable or in /A. Okay, so when maybe should we apply online? So some employers do only have an online application like we discussed last class. Sometimes that's just more of a formality, especially if it's a bigger organization. They may not have any options for you to apply in person. Now, you can possibly still go into the business and ask about an application, and they may tell you, oh, our application is online, and tell you where it's located at. And that's totally fine. That still leaves an impression. Applying online obviously allows you to complete more applications in a shorter amount of time, and it increases your availability to distant jobs. So, like I said, if you're applying somewhere out of state, especially, or somewhere that's not local, then you're probably going to go ahead and apply online because it might not be possible for you to apply in person. And then, lastly, tends to be a better option for larger companies. Once again, that's just due to if there's a certain hierarchy, that's probably going to be their process, because the HR department will look at it first before they move it on to the hiring manager oftentimes. And that's also another reason why your applications need to be thorough, because it is true that a lot of times a human resources department will see your application and kind of look for certain elements before the person who's actually hiring for the position even sees the application. So when you're applying online, here's some tips. Once again, try to read the entire application before beginning, if possible. Sometimes online it's not as possible because it kind of takes you page by page. But make sure you also know how to use their layout. So depending on if you're applying on the company website, emailing, or if you're using one of those hiring databases like Indeed or Monster, those layouts are going to look a little bit different. So just take some time to familiarize yourself with those so that you don't miss anything. Use a clean, easy to read font. So this is obviously very important. A lot of times if you're using a online database, it's going to have an automatic font, but sometimes you're able to download and save the application as a PDF or in a Word document, and so you would have the ability to choose a font. Typically, you always want to go with Times New Roman or Calibri Arial, something that's just really basic. Because as you can see from this graphic, some fonts can be hard to read, and obviously you want your employer to be able to read your application. And with online applications, since a lot of them are going to be similar, I've found that it's beneficial to maybe make sure you have all your information saved in another file, like a Google Doc or a Word doc, so then that you can copy and paste, and that's going to be quicker. But also be careful when you're copying and pasting to make sure you review everything, to make sure you know that you didn't maybe accidentally copy an extra line for a section and things like that. But that is totally acceptable, and it's going to make it easier for you all. So, work harder, not smarter, a lot of the times is my life philosophy. So let's talk about some just additional tips when applying. If you're applying in person, maybe bring your work history with those addresses, phone numbers, and supervisor names, because a lot of times applications are going to ask for all of those elements. And sometimes we don't always have contact with our old supervisors, so that's why it's important to make sure you do have an updated phone number, so that you can put that on the application. And then, of course, always have your references ready. So a lot of applications and job postings will ask for 3 references, professional references. So not, your best friend, but people you've worked for. Your instructors are definitely a professional reference. So you want to always make sure that maybe you have 3 people in mind that you think knows your work ethic and will be able to give you a good professional reference. Because sometimes too, jobs will call references. It's kind of a myth that, jobs never call references, but from first-hand experience, that's not always the case. I've had multiple jobs that have actually reached out to my references. So make sure when you are providing a reference, you have accurate contact information, because if an employer isn't able to contact your reference, that's going to be a bit of a problem. Check your salary requirements. A lot of times on applications, it is going to ask you for a desired salary, and sometimes on those job postings, it will give you a salary range. So for example, if the range is from $40,000 to $50,000, if you're wanting a job that is a salary of $70,000 and you put that on the application, likely they're probably going to pass up your application because that's outside of their range. But also, sometimes there's no salary indication on the job posting, so go ahead and be honest with that as well. And sometimes there is some wiggle room, but as a safe bet, you maybe don't want to necessarily put any salary that's $10,000 or $20,000 above their max salary. And then on applications, a lot of times it's going to ask you to list your work history, which of course is going to likely be on your resume. So it is very tempting to put "see resume" on those lines because it is pretty redundant. But you do want to still, once again, fill out that work history on the application. If you put "see resume," that can kind of come off as lazy a little bit, and then you're also adding additional work to the hiring team, because now they have to pull up your resume to look at that instead of just looking at it on the application. So that might kind of come across negative. And then of course, always be professional on your applications. Check your spelling, your grammar. Don't put anything inappropriate on there. Not that I think that you all would, but as we've seen, sometimes it does happen with those emails we looked at last class. And then here's some other information that you'll likely want to keep handy as you're completing the application process. So your social security number, a lot of times applications ask for that, and that is so they can confirm your citizenship status a lot of the times. And speaking of citizenship status, if you're not an American citizen, then you'll want to make sure you have your citizenship documents handy because they will ask for proof of that. Your education experience, so maybe your GPA, sometimes it asks for that, not a lot, but definitely where you went to school and where that school is located. The address a lot of times is going to be required. And then, of course, your work experience. And also, once we go through the resume unit and we update your all's resumes, that'll be on the resume, so that'll be a good place to have that information handy. But if you don't quite have a resume yet, then you want to make sure that your work experience is all in one place. And then lastly, our last few slides here, oftentimes there is other required information. If you all have served in the military, that's going to be asked. They are going to ask you too if you are a veteran on almost every single application. So make sure you are clear on that. If you have any criminal convictions, it will ask for information on that as well, such as I think A lot of times it's, what kind of charge was it, when, things like that. Your date available to work. So you want to be completely honest with this, because you may think, well, I'll just put, as soon as possible because that'll look better. Well, if you are available as soon as possible, then yes, that's great. But if you do get the job and then you actually say, well, actually I'm not done with school until May and that's when I would be available for full time, that's going to be confusing for the employer and come across as not the greatest. So be honest with your date available. Don't be afraid to put a few weeks out. A lot of times it is an expectation that you give your current employer a 2 weeks notice, so that is definitely not unheard of on these applications. Reasons for leaving previous position, a lot of times that's asked on applications, and that can kind of be a loaded question, because sometimes you're leaving a position because you're just not happy. Maybe you don't get along with your boss. You don't necessarily want to say that. On the next slide, we'll go over some elements that you would want to say for that particular section. And then also don't forget to sign and date the application. If you don't do this, then it's technically not valid, so it may get passed up. If you're submitting an application online, there's usually an option for an electronic signature, so that you don't have to print it out, sign it, and then re-upload it. But don't forget that part of the application. So lastly, let's talk about maybe some reasons for leaving your previous position. So here's kind of some top 10 reasons for leaving a job that also have a positive connotation with them, because like I said, you don't want to necessarily put, well, I hated my boss, so I hate it here, that's why I'm leaving. Even if that is true, because a lot of times it is, use one of these reasons. Maybe you want to advance your career. That's always a safe bet. Organizational changes, that's fair. That's a way to say, I wasn't happy here, but in a more positive way. Maybe you could say you weren't challenged. Maybe you want to increase your compensation. That's definitely understandable. That's why we work, to get paid. But for a lot of you too, one that's not listed on here that you will be able to use is that you finished your education. So now you're looking for a full-time job that will turn into a career versus maybe a part-time job you've been working. So that's totally fine to put too, for where you guys are all at in life, is that you've completed college. So now you're looking for a full-time job. But definitely avoid overall, my previous employer sucked, so I'm leaving. Don't put that on the application. So I hope all of this makes sense. If you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know.